Good evening. I am just going to check that I have actually unmuted myself because I've got previous for doing this. It's such a disaster. Anyway, welcome. It's so good. Tonight we are going to be talking about Where is God Now? It's a panel discussion. There have been questions put forward and voted for Christians, non-Christians, people from across Scotland. And we've assembled an amazing panel of speakers and they are going to discuss these questions. Before I quickly introduce them, let me put up a disclaimer. These are these people's opinions. They're not my opinions. Do not associate me with some of these answers. But also just from their organisations and stuff, this is just going to be what we think, where we're at right now. And we really hope it's helpful for some people. And if you've got any questions, please get in touch with us. I have a chat window in the corner. None of these guys can see it, so it's pretty good. You can just talk to me. But let me just run through who we have on the call. So we have Lynn Patterson. Lynn is the head of prayer mobilisation at Tear Fund. You want to just say hi, Lynn, so people can see your face?
Hi, everyone.
There we go. We have the Reverend Dr. Ian Birch, Principal of the Scottish Baptist College. You need to say hello as well, Ian, otherwise we can't see you.
Hello, Des. Hello, everybody.
Yeah. We've got Charlie Maz, who's the Chief Executive of Glasgow City Mission.
Hello, everyone.
And definitely wins a prize for the best background. Who believed that was in Paisley, right? We've got Reverend Dr. Lena Toth, who's the Assistant Principal and Lecturer in Practical Theology at the Scottish Baptist College.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, and she's got a nice map in her background. You guys are doing me a shame here. It's terrible. We've got Reverend Dr. Brodie McGregor from, he pastors at Queen's Park Baptist Church. Hi, Brodie.
Evening, Des. Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to have you, mate. And last by no means least, the Dundee tornado, the whirlwind that is Andy Bannister, Dr. Andy Bannister, no less, Director of the Sola Centre for Public Christianity. How you doing, Andy?
Doing well this evening, Des, and good evening to everybody watching this on the live stream.
Yeah, by the way, I like this virtual background with QR codes and everything. Very high tech, mate.
We have great tech people.
Yeah, it's good, man. It's good. Okay, so tonight we are going to be trying to talk through 14 questions that we're going to try and cover in the next hour. When we looked at the questions, there were really kind of three overarching themes within them. The first was impact on the church. The second was how can God allow this stroke? What is he doing? And the third was how we maintain our relationship with him in this. So we've reorganized the questions slightly just to make it really easy for us to talk about. We're going to talk about them under those questions, under those themes, and we'll just run through them as quick as we can, but also making space to actually chat about it, you know. So we are going to kick off because we may as well. We're already here. And I have to be honest, we had quite a lot of beard stroke dinosaur related questions. I may be responsible for some of that. So let me kick off. This was the highest ranked question, okay? Des's beard is awesome. Has it been carbon dated and does it precede the dinosaurs? I would like to say it hasn't been carbon dated. The last time I was clean shaven was 2008. And I really love dinosaurs. There's a great book, you should read about it. But hey, send me a message about that privately. We could have a dinosaur-specific beard-related chat. That'd be really good. So we should probably start with the next question, which is number 2 on our list. So what sort of implications and or desired effects do you think the lockdown will have on the church as a whole? So let's have a wee look at this first question. From the point of view of someone who's been a church leader and is now responsible for training the next generations of church leaders. Ian, do you want to maybe kick us off? What do you think about this?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, Des. I mean, I think some of us who are involved in church life and training people for church ministry have been concerned about church for quite some time. And, you know, there's been a decline in church attendance. We've been wondering what the future is going to bring. And this has really shaken things up, you know, right from the foundations to the top of the steeple. And, you know, God might be right at the heart of that, in a sense of bringing about a shakedown of the way that church is going about its business at the present time. I think one of the interesting things in my own experience and just observing what seems to be happening in my network is that the church is continuing, and in fact, church is flourishing at the present time. And that's really exciting. I wonder whether a part of that in a sense, is due to the fact that church, for many people, has been stripped back from all of the usual encumbrances that go on. Worship has had to be much reduced. There's been a greater emphasis on reading scripture and on prayer, and church nourishing people's spirituality. And I think the other interesting thing I'd just like to flag up is the sense of building community. You know, we've always said, and we know that church is not the building, it is the people, but this is really hammering home that point that church is the people. And in our own church, it's been really lovely that a couple of people ring me up every week and ask me how I'm getting on, and we have a chat, and then on a Sunday when we meet through Zoom, there's a real emphasis on the community of the people. So that's a good thing. It's bringing us back to some of our core values and core theology of what the church is. So things being stripped back, no bad thing, but obviously the whole pandemic is a sadness for those who are losing loved ones, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. But
yeah. No, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I think you're right. We can't lose sight of this is such a global pandemic and such a wider issue than just what's facing us right here. But in fact, Lynn, maybe I could bring you in on this. So you've got a global responsibility with looking after prayer and stuff. How are you seeing these implications and effects globally?
Well, it's hard to speak on behalf of the whole world, but I guess from a tier fund point of view, we are working with in 50 of the world's poorest countries, particularly thinking about the global south. And it's interesting thinking about what Ian was saying there. I guess the overriding impact that lockdown in this situation is having on the churches in the global south is that it's plunging people into poverty. And that actually overrides all the other kind of nuances about church and community and all the other things, is that actually people who live hand to mouth are not able to go out and are not able to earn a living. So I mean, the kind of negative impact on the church and society as a whole is quite staggering at this time. And I guess on the flip side of that, the opportunity for mission that I'm sure was going to come up in our conversations that goes on, that is also compounded by the challenges that people face in these countries. So the opportunity for the church to rise up and have a role as a trusted public servant, of kind of health messaging, for example, where governments aren't particularly trusted. The church, people in the global south are on the whole people of faith, and the church is trusted. Church leaders are trusted to give out safe public health messaging, which will aid prevention, and that's been shown before in things like the Ebola crisis, where church leaders were pivotal and churches were pivotal in getting the message out and people changing their behaviour. So really working with churches to equip and enable them to do that and to be able to be the salt and light that God has meant them to be. So I guess kind of a kind of compounded negative and compounded positive impact on the church in that part of the world.
I think it is just such an interesting thing how everyone's responding in different ways, and we've obviously been chatting to some of the guys from Alpha Asia Pacific and things and hearing what they're doing, and it is just so fascinating that it all comes down to these ideas of relationships, and there's always the question, are things being strengthened or are strongholds being tested? And maybe we could go a bit deeper with this. Brodie, as a church pastor, do you think that there are areas that are clearly being strengthened or strongholds that are really being tested?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think there's lots of things. One of the things, kind of like picking up on some of what Lynn was saying. So Lynn and I were in the same prayer meeting the other week there in Lebanon. And one of the leaders there said, you know what, people with empty bellies can't hear the gospel. And that's the reality. And I think one of the things that this is highlighting is the inequalities in our society. You know, doing church on through the internet is great. But how do we reach the people who don't have a good internet connection, who, you know, for them to get on the internet was a case of going to the library, or just are fearful of technology? So I mean, like, one of the challenges that we've had of keeping relationships, of checking in on people, of making sure that people are okay. And the thing that's been strengthened for me is that, you know, as Ian said, you know, that the church isn't the building, it's the people. And also the pastor isn't the sole minister, but it's about body ministry. And I can't phone everybody in our church. And it's been great when I have phoned people, particularly some of our elder members, to find out they've already spoken to half a dozen different people that day by the time that I've got to. In fact, sometimes trying to get hold of them, the phone's always engaged. So that whole ministering to each other, looking out for each other, what does it mean to love our neighbour? So just some of the random acts of kindness and things like that, both of people in the church but outside the church. And that's the challenge for us, isn't it? Of, as Christians, what's the distinctive that we bring here when it comes to what it means to love our neighbour? And the thing that I'm really conscious of as well, of we've got to think kingdom and not empire. It's so easy now for us all to, I think in the first few weeks, you know, some folk were going to 5 or 6 different church meetings online, and there's that whole comparison thing. And the primary task of the church is to be faithful to what God has called us to do. And that's going to look different for different people. We need traditional style church. We need cutting edge style church. We need churches that bring out the different God flavors of the kingdom. And therefore it's okay to be different. The key thing for us, I think, the thing that needs to be challenged is that whole obedience to what God's calling us to do.
Yeah. Thanks for that, mate. And I think that idea of body ministry is like so important. You know, it's a 1 Corinthians 12, you know, like the body, like we need to be hands, we need to be feet, we need eyes, we need ears, but we each need to fit into our own part. And I think, you know, post-COVID, church is going to look very, very different. You know, we can't expect it to carry on looking the same. And yeah, it's interesting. Let's maybe go in a slightly different direction. Let me read this question for you. This is one of the ones that was sent out. How can we best engage with folk who are searching for meaning right now when we can't meet face to face, in particular folk who don't have a connection with an existing church? I've maybe got a couple of ideas about what we could maybe do with that. You know, there's some really great organisations. Some use a red question mark, just saying. But I think that there's maybe somebody here who's uniquely gifted in answering this. Andy Bannister, do you want to give us a wee thought on this for you, mate?
Absolutely, Des. I can't imagine which organisation that specialises in brightly coloured punctuation marks you could possibly have had in mind.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm sure they're really good.
Exactly. It is a wonderful question, though. And what's I think interesting is that, you know, it's picking up on something that we're seeing in the culture. I'm going to be really brave with the technology and see if I can do a screen share. You know, there was a report over the weekend picking up on some research that Tear Fund had done, of course, looking at this, you know, this survey that's shown that more and more people are tuning in to kind of religious services online. It was interesting. 25% of adults in the UK have watched some kind of, you know, religious service in the UK since coronavirus began. So I think there's a lot of people that are asking big questions. This is a tremendous opportunity, I think, for the church. And interestingly, even those who perhaps aren't tuning into religious services are beginning to ask some pretty big questions. There was a fascinating article in the Spectator magazine in March, just when lockdown was about to begin, by Douglas Murray, who is an atheist journalist, really asking this whole question of, you know, where do we find purpose? And he goes on in that article to talk about the fact that, you know, society has really left the question of purpose unasked. And I think a lot of people out there, you know, looked for their identity and their meaning and their significance in things like, you know, their job, their career, their bank balance. Everything was going well. And along has come coronavirus and stripped that all away. So I think it's a terrific opportunity for Christians actually to be reaching out to people. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things I'm a real advocate for is, as Christians, I think it'd be wonderful if we stopped talking about social distancing and started talking about physical distancing. We need to stay separate physically from people, 2 meters or so away, for the good, particularly of the weak and the vulnerable. But people are yearning and are hungry for social connection. So maybe in our day-to-day lives, for those of us who are Christians watching this, we should begin each day by praying, Lord, can you show me where I am having connections with people that I could lean into? So for example, we found, we take a lot more effort than perhaps we had been doing with our next door neighbors. I feel a little bit guilty that actually we'd been sort of community where we all hide behind our doors. Now I think we're all craving for contact. So when we see our neighbors taking the bins out, I'll stop and talk. Having small children has helped, because actually one of the things that the children in our local area have started doing are occasionally knocking on each other's doors and delivering candy, chocolate, leaving it on the doorstep and stepping back. And we as mum and dad have been using that as a way to start conversations. A few weeks ago we had Easter, and we took the opportunity to deliver like an Easter card and a little Christian book and a gift of chocolate to each family that we knew in the community. So there are those ways locally. When you go on your daily Boris walk for an hour a day, if you see somebody else on your walk, don't rush past them like they're a plague victim. Stop, and from the other side of the street, talk. Ask how they're doing. Ask how they're really doing. Ask if there's anything you do to help. And I think if you lean into those social connections, God can use those in amazing ways. And then finally, Des, the other thing we can do is online. We are very, very blessed that we are in this time of coronavirus, where we have digital technology. Imagine this back in horror of horrors, the 1970s. It would have been a different matter entirely. We have great opportunities. And so, you were very bashful, but Alpha have some great resources. Christianity Explored have some great resources that you can use, that you can invite friends along to. And at Solas, for those of you watching this, we have this great resource called, if I can find it actually, called Short Answers. And these are just short videos that you can share on Facebook or kind of social media. And they're great evangelistic conversation starters. There are lots of these resources around. So if you're on Facebook, if you're on social media, as well as updating people and telling them how you're doing, what about sharing one of those resources from ours or Alpha or Christianity Explored or those other ministries, and seeing how God uses it? Use it as a conversation starter. Don't sort of lob it like a hand grenade into the conversation and hope it closes everything down. Use it to open conversations up and then see how God takes it forward.
Yeah, great, Andy. Love that. Thanks, mate. With that, I think there's a couple of things going on there. Obviously, I work for Alpha. I love Alpha. We've had loads of Alphas taking place online, which is just really exciting, and people coming in with new questions. There's almost 50 churches running online Alphas that we know about, and it's just so exciting. But the other thing is, I'm part of an incarnational mission team, and we've just loved our neighbours for a while now, but it's paying dividends now. We're all in the garden, like painting each other's fences, making sure not to upset one another's hedges when we've been cutting them, and actually that's where this journey of relationship starts, isn't it? And I think you pulled out a wee theme there of hospitality, and that actually leads us nicely on to our next question. Where and how does the role of hospitality factor into the role of the church's community within today's culture and society? Now, that's an incredibly long question. There's only one guy who can really answer that, I think. Charlie, let me put this to you. You used to own a coffee shop. You've been a chef, and you are the CEO at the City Mission. You might know a thing or two about hospitality. Do you want to take a lead on that for us, buddy? I don't know if you...
I was just saying that I've lost some of the conversation because of technology, and I'm that guy,
There had to be someone. I'm just glad it was
someone had to do it, but that's all right. I've got the backdrop. Okay, hospitality. So it took no time. It's been striking, actually, the hospitality thing. I mean, for me, it's been a way of life even before my faith life for me began. But it took no time, I think we could see, for people to decide, if you ever tried to buy self-raising flour these days, that people were going to bake together. Once the ability to visit, say, high priests and temples of retailing and consumerism were removed, communities just got straight to it. They putting together neighborhood groups, support groups for each other on streets in schemes. So it's been incredible how immediately, once trappings and the things that sort of oblige us to be isolated from our neighbors, like Andy was saying, are removed, we immediately start to come together again. So you wonder what is at the heart of that. So is this, and coupled with a refocusing of faith-filled people on what it really means to love God and neighbor, the golden rule, love God, love neighbor, which when applied causes us to become like reflectors of the divine. Jesus Jesus obviously spent a lot of time around tables. We love him for it, especially at the City Mission. We use him and his demonstration of the table as an exemplar. But importantly, we see that Jesus rejected the coin, render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, as the necessary token of value and exchange. But it's this intention, we think, that we find Jesus' his financial officer even traded him in for a bag of coins. But it's hospitality that is the currency of the kingdom, isn't it? It's hospitality which is the special quality that presents the divine table. When we present the table as somewhere where we only gather, we tell stories about ourselves, we can begin to heal, others are healed, community is built, we bring Jesus into the presence of that in intentional ways, and then we've got a real communion. We've taken those symbols of communion and the little squares of sunblessed and the over diluted juice out of the churches, and we get it round a table when we're able, distance appropriate, but not socially distanced, as you said, Andy, importantly. And we start to reclaim these symbols as real things, a real communion with people. And you never know, in this way, we unwittingly entertain angels. And Acts and Epistles as well. The Epistles is very much a radical group of people who are looking to connect, who are looking to exchange hospitality, who are looking to experience and be immersed in a community of people who are hospitality driven in a radical way, unlike the surrounding culture. So we need to find something in that love of God, love of neighbor, where we radically reflect God in the way in which we do hospitality, and then hospitality genuinely is the currency of the kingdom.
Amen, brother.
Amen.
I also like the symbol of a symbol of a symbol of a symbol.
It's a symbol.
Dr. Blythe. Yeah, so it's all good. We've got one final question in this section under the impact that this is having on the church, and that is, what does the impact of the coronavirus tell us about what constitutes a church? Lena, can I ask you to take a steer with us on this one? You've experienced lots of different church over the years, just growing up in different countries, living in different countries, lecturing in different ways. And as a practical theologian, how would you respond to this?
Sure, Des. Just in case you're wondering, what are these all different exotic countries that Des is mentioning? I was born in Lithuania when it was still the Soviet Union, and Christians weren't exactly the most popular people in society. And then spent quite a few years of my life in Central Europe before becoming an adopted Scot. I really found this probably one of the most interesting aspects of the lockdown. And I mean interesting, as a theologian, thinking about the church and its nature, because it has forced all of us to really think hard, all of us who say we're followers of Jesus, to decide what is that very essence of the church, without which the church is no longer the church. Well, some churches perhaps haven't, and I suspect they will be the ones who may not stay for very long around. But many have really embraced that question. Well, they had to, in one way or another. And as in any crisis, it gives us an opportunity to think deeper and think afresh and think anew. And crises like these, they really clarify our convictions like nothing else. I was reflecting on my own experience of these last few weeks. And whilst I'm missing the face-to-face encounters, I found myself time and again being surprised really by joy at the ease of being involved in the church more globally. Yes, online, but in a way that feels, quite real. I'm joining with other folks who follow Jesus, but live in a different corner of the world. And yet we can all be together around prayer and scripture and sharing life together in that way as it's possible at this time. And again, as Andy was saying, this is what the technology of today has made possible for us. We also have to remember people who don't have electricity or phones and computers to do exactly the same, and it's a very different experience for them. But this is quite interesting, and in some ways, just occasionally, I thought, I'm glimpsing something of heaven here. the disappearance of barriers, at least geographical barriers, quite often other cultural barriers and language barriers, and we can be together face to face, sort of. At some other times it didn't quite feel like heaven, but you know what I mean. There was something there that made my heart beat faster. But when I think about that question, what is it that makes the church the church? It was very interesting to see how churches went about that often most visible part of their church life, which is corporate worship, usually on Sunday. And although in some cases, yes, it's technology that decides, and in many cases, I think these decisions were quite instinctual. And to me, they crystallized two different emphases. And this is what I see at the moment happening as in terms of where the church is. For some, the church seems to be, first of all, the one that proclaims the message. A message that is prepared by a few and then is to be heard by many, perhaps pre-recorded or live streamed, but flowing mostly one way, with worshippers kind of worshiping individually and possibly not even at the same time if they watch a recording later. As some articles already are suggesting, it's surprising how many quote unquote new people seem to plug into such kind of worship. I suspect it's safely anonymous in a good way. It allows them to approach a faith community or perhaps return to a faith community without feeling exposed or making any kind of commitment. I suspect the temptation for this kind of theological emphasis on what the church is becoming a performance-based entity and forgetting that the church is supposed to be a community. So for others, therefore, the emphasis has been different, and instinctually they immediately went for things that sustain fellowship and truly corporate worship that is interactive and takes place real time, and therefore is likely to involve all the mess that comes from multi-voiced interaction, but at the same time allows a much deeper sense of connection with each other as a body of Christ. And here again, many churches are using conferencing software, and they have been surprised by how many more folks seem to be joining. That's true also of my church, one of the churches in one of my home churches, the one that is in Glasgow, that we've had many more folk join, former members who now live elsewhere, somebody's auntie, somebody's grandma, somebody's grandchild, and so on. Again, people clearly long for connection and community, and they join in. Well, here, I suppose the danger and temptation is, of course, the possible insularity. You know, you have to know someone who will help you to join that kind of group of people. Mind you, if we go back to the beginning of Christianity, early Christians didn't exactly publicize their gatherings either, right? But somehow people would find them. So that's about corporate worship, which often seems to be the face of the church. But there's this other side, isn't there? The mission. And what churches are doing or are not doing at this time as they respond to the needs of those who are not just within, but also beyond the communities. As some of the examples that you were already saying, they can be done individually and they can be done together as a church. Whether it's food banks or taking care of those who are shielding or helping those who are experiencing abuse, or just showing hospitality in a multitude of ways. Last thing, perhaps, what churches are not doing, or perhaps are doing that I think they should not, is those who have been rebelling against the directives. And I think they fail the basic commandment to love one's neighbor by doing that and insisting on their right to come together and join. If it has potential to harm others, then I want to say it's not quite the church. And I'm afraid it will be judged as such by the watching world, even before it's judged by God. So I think these are some of the questions that we need to be thinking about at the moment in terms of what is it that makes the church the church? And I suppose we'll be surprised in terms of the new shapes that it will start taking longer term. We are in early days still, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great answer. I think you covered everything there, Lena. And also, you know, to end the impact on the church with a lot more questions about what the impact will be on the church sounds like a good sequel for maybe a part 2 of this. So we're going to move on to the second section just now. And that section, or that theme that we pulled out of the questions that you guys were asking, was how can God allow this stroke? What is he doing? The first question is what I like to think of as a proper Scottish question. No mucking about, straight to the point. Why is God letting COVID happen? Absolute belter. It's also very similar to another question we were asked, which was, has God caused this to happen? So I think actually, if we were to try and answer both of those, we're just going to end up saying the same thing. So we'll bundle those together. And yeah, Andy, maybe you're bound to have something to say on this topic. Would you like to kick us off with this?
I love the fact, Des, that you said this is a proper Scottish question and you passed it to the Englishman. I know I've been living here for 3.5 years, but that was I see what you did there. That's a great question, actually.
It's right, you know, we're trying to be nice, shaking hands across the board there, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, what I like about this question is at SOLAS we try and spend the greater proportion of our time engaging with folks who don't have any Christian faith, who are sometimes outrightly hostile, certainly often skeptical, certainly often searching. And this is probably the number one question we're kind of hearing right now. Let me say a few things. Like so many of the questions, I mean, kudos to folks who've been sending questions in via Pigeonhole. There are wonderful questions, each of which could take an entire evening. Let me say a couple of things, but I'm also going to recommend right at the start a book because I'm just going to scratch the surface. But for whoever asked that or those questions, if you want to dig deeper, a wonderful little book is this book. Look at this. This is virtual backgrounds not working so well. There we go. John Lennox, Where is God in a Coronavirus World? And John is a friend of mine, professor at Oxford University, really gifted Christian communicator and a scientist and a Bible teacher. It's a wonderful little book. So I'll say a few things, but if anything sort of makes you think, oh, that's interesting, John's book is great. It's about a couple of quid online on most booksellers. You know, Des, what's interesting, the way you phrase those questions were asked, they covered two sides of what I think are very unhelpful answers to this question, because I think what's interesting, first of all, we all ask why. It's the natural human instinct, which I think is interesting in of itself, right? When human beings suffer, we don't simply go, well, that's just life. We instinctively ask the why question. We're the only creature that does that, and that makes it something profoundly unique about human beings. And there are some quite bad answers sloshing around out there right now. I would certainly say there are incredibly unhelpful atheist answers. If you were going to be a wholly consistent atheist, I guess you would have to say, this is wonderful. This is evolution doing its thing. The COVID-19 virus has evolved magnificently. Look at it. It's beautiful under the microscope. And look, it's coming along and it's weeding out the weak and the elderly and the infirm. It's basically cleaning up the herd. So the human race is stronger and more robust, ready to face whatever the future holds. Fascinatingly, that as a society, we've rejected that answer because it may, score sort of 10 out of 10 for atheism, but it's an utter disaster, when it's your grandmother who's ill, your loved ones who fall sick. And as a country, I am so impressed as a nation that we haven't gone that route. We haven't said, yeah, let's schlep the elderly over the edge and the rest of us move on. We've said, no, let's crash the economy. Let's lock up the healthy. Let's inconvenience the majority of us so we can protect the weak. And as Tom Holland, the historian, not a Christian, he's agnostic, has written, he said that's a profoundly Christian response, interestingly. So the atheist answer fails, and ironically, in its failure points to something deeper. But then we also have in the question, the other side of the question you quoted there are unhelpful atheist answers, there are unhelpful religious answers. And there have been occasionally some religious people have a temptation to pop up and say, well, this is the judgment of the Lord. God is judging the nation, for whatever the particular sin is of the moment. And what's interesting with the unhelpful religious answer is Jesus addresses it directly. Christians have no excuse for trying to fall back on this one because Jesus addresses it directly. In Luke chapter 13, the third of the three historical biographies of Jesus of Nazareth we find in the New Testament, Jesus is asked, about some Jewish people, some Galileans, who have been brutally killed by Pilate, the Roman governor, who was a brutal tyrant, and he had killed these Jewish people apparently while they were at the temple sacrificing, and had mixed their blood with the blood of the Jewish sacrifices. And Jesus is asked, have they done something particularly wrong? Is this God's judgment on them? And Jesus doesn't dance around. He goes full Scottish. He just goes, no, that's ridiculous. Absolutely not. There was nothing worse about them. That wasn't why they suffered. And then he gives another example, actually, that apparently been a tower that had fallen on some people and had killed some people. Very sort of sad tragedy. And again, Jesus says there was nothing particularly bad about these people. That wasn't why the tower fell on them. So he points to both an example of moral evil, the evil of Pilate, and what we might call a natural evil, just a tower falling over, and says neither of those things were the case, that God was using them for judgment. Rather, we live in a world, the Bible says, where there is sin and evil and death. The world is not functioning the way it should be. Something has gone fundamentally wrong, the Christian story says, with creation. Something has gone wrong with our relationship with God, our relationship with each other because of that, and our relationship with the world that we live in. And as you read on in Luke 13, what's interesting, Jesus, although he's not willing to blame God for those episodes, he does use the question as a teaching moment. And he points out, although, the tower falling down, the actions of Pilate, or today, COVID-19, they may not be expressly God's judgment. They do perhaps remind us that life is mortal, that we will all die, and that we will all stand before God at some point and will be held to account for our actions. We'll be held to account for how we've treated the weak and the vulnerable, what we've done with the gift of life that was given to us. And Jesus goes on in that passage to say, let's talk more specifically about us and our relationship with God and ensure that is put right. And so I think that's the beginning of a Christian answer to this question. It's not the judgment of God. We live in a world that is broken. The Bible says, teaches profoundly about what God has done about that in and through the person of Jesus. But whenever this question is raised, Jesus himself likes to use it to point to that ultimate question of where do we stand before our Heavenly Father, who we will meet one day, some of us sooner, some of us later, but we will all have that conversation with our Maker one day.
Yeah, I think it's a great response, Andy. For anybody watching at home as well, I've put the link for that book just into the chat, so you'll be able to find that. It's phenomenal and it's small, which Ian Birch, when he was one of my lecturers, told me a small thin book is as good as a big thick book. That's what you said, Ian, right? Something like that. Anyway, Ian, do you want to come in with a response to that? Are you got anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just it's just that there was another religious answer that I've heard on the TV on shows a couple of times, and I wonder whether Andy's thoughts about this one, because I haven't got a clever answer and he might have one. But there's been a couple of instances of churches in the States, not all of which have closed down, some which are disobeying the law. Because they believe, a Christian has to just keep battling on. But there was a clip, I think it might have been on the news, of a pastor in one of those American churches who was not blaming God, but was blaming the devil for the virus and saying that the virus was sent by Satan. And the best protection was really just to have faith in God. And if you're not a believer, the chances are that you'll get it and it'll be disastrous. But you can avoid catching it, or it won't harm you if you have faith in God. Which is a fairly simplistic sort of binary view of where the disease comes from and the best remedy. So, Andy, what do you think about that?
I'm getting Des asking the questions in one ear, Ian in the other. That's a really good question, Ian. One thing I'm very conscious of right at the start, it's very easy for us, of course, to sit here on the Zoom and throw stones at our American cousins and go, oh, we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't do it that way. I lived in North America for 6 years, admittedly in Canada, which some would say is cheating. So lots of North American friends. And I think, you can find examples of slightly foolish Christianity wherever you look. Let me say a couple of things in answer to that. Firstly, what's interesting is right from the very beginning, Ian, of course, right from the beginning of the church, Christians knew we lived in a world where there was suffering and disease and so forth. You know, I think someone's alluded to it this already, actually. There have been pandemics throughout history, right? About every 50 to 100 years, one comes along. And the first Christians lived through plague. And it's interesting to look at the response right back in the, the first and second centuries. Christians didn't fall back on those simplistic answers. What was interesting, they did fall back on the answer of going, we do trust that ultimately our lives belong to the Lord. So if I die, it's the Lord. If I live, it's the Lord. And I think there are some lessons about faith there, because I do not worry when Christians begin panicking in response, say, to coronavirus. Also, those first Christians were known for living self-sacrificially. And, you know, while all the pagans are running away from the cities, it was Christians who were famous for saying, no, hang on a moment, I'm going to stay and hang around, even if at personal risk, even though God may not choose to save me. And then scroll forward a bit further, we come to the Reformation. And there's a wonderful quote I came across the other week from Martin Luther saying something similar, saying my duty as a Christian is not to put others at risk through my foolish behavior. I think Lena kind of touched on this at the end of her answer, but nevertheless, not to think of myself, to put myself at risk to help others. And he also added, if the Lord takes me, so be it. If I live, so be it. And I think my correction to that American example you would give would be, we need to live wisely in the way that we live and treat others, and look out for those around us. But let's not kid ourselves and pretend we're living wisely when we're perhaps chickening out and holding back and going, it's safer, it's more comfortable for me to live this way, when actually God might be causing us to live sacrificially. And yeah, as Christians, we believe in the power of prayer, and I certainly believe in the power of healing. We also, as you say, we don't live in a binary world. It's not as simple as Christians have a magic formula. We put a penny of prayer in the slot and ding, God behaves a certain way. Sometimes God heals, sometimes God doesn't. But also we know that God is ultimately in control. And I think the thing that should mark Christians out in this crisis from those who are not Christians, I think the one virtue that I'm excited when I see it, and I'm nervous when I don't, is hope. That we are people of hope. And so many non-Christian friends I've talked to now are saying, where's the hope? That's the question they're looking for. And if we can be people of hope, we don't have all the answers as to the whys, but we do have an answer as to where the hope can be found, even when we may question other pieces. I hope some of that helps, Ian.
Yeah, no, I think that's really... Lena, have you got anything you'd like to add into that?
Into that, whether God has caused COVID, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, first of all, I want to shout loud and clear, no, God did not. God did not. If anybody has caused it to happen, it's us humans. And I think there's a lot of thinking and collective soul searching that I wish we were undertaking as a nation, as Western civilization, in terms of the practices that contribute to the way we contact with animals, and all the rest of it. Hopefully that will happen. But I think also this question, it's a legitimate question, and an important question. And I'm thinking of those who profess faith, who are asking it because this is the first time they're experiencing a serious crisis of faith, perhaps because their loved one has got sick or lost a job, or in some shape or form they have felt the impact already of what's happening. And I suspect this might be the moment when we realize, maybe for the first time for some of us, that this whole God and faith stuff is much more complex, and that God is very different from some powerful, capricious figure who decides on a whim or on some other unknown criteria what to allow to happen and what not. And it's just a reminder, isn't it, that sad and difficult things will happen. And sometimes that's even part of our following Jesus, that we are prepared for them to happen. We're not protected from them by guarantee of some sort. Our hope lies somewhere else. And indeed, at times, in a crisis like this, God might feel painfully absent. A bit like God probably did for the nation of Israel in that period between the prophecy of Malachi until the emergence of John the Baptizer and his cousin, who started to teach with his own ministry, named Jesus, right? So those were long years of waiting. And even though we're New Testament people, I think we have to be prepared sometimes to live with that palpable sense of almost absence of God. And if that's what's happening, with someone who's listening, I would just want to say, don't squash those emotions and those feelings. Ask God for answers, demand God of answers, protest, complain, do all those things that the psalmists did, and we have them recorded. God can take all of that. And as you do that, I think then you discover that God actually is there, has been there all along, present in the suffering and with those who do suffer. And I think it's only at this point that actually we begin to discover God as God is, someone very different from our imagination. And that is true for all of us. So wherever we are in our own journey of faith, I think that's partly what we're reminded. So yeah, God did not allow this to happen, but in it happening, we have a chance to discover a bit more of God and get closer to God, perhaps in a different way than we expected or even ever wished. But it will be worth it.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, that one question alone we could sit all night and talk about and rip to bits. And I know Brodie and Charlie and Lynn and stuff would love to get in on that. But actually, we've had a comment from someone out in the real world, Marion Carson. I'm assuming it's lecturer Marion Carson. So hey, and she says that people think this way in part because of a simplistic, foundationalist view of Scripture. This needs to be addressed by the church. Boom. I think if you're trying to sum it up, that is a win right there, Marion. So thanks. We should get you on the call next time. Can we maybe just move forward into the next question? And this is one of the ones that came in from Pigeonhole, as are most of the questions, except for the ones that Ian throws in. The question is, it's quite heated, it's quite difficult. So let me just read this to you here. It says, what do you think God wants to say to all the women and children trapped at home with their abusers right now? Can I just say before we go any further that there is help out there for anyone who's in that situation. Please get in touch with us or any local church or anyone that you can reach out to if this is something that's affecting you right now, and we'd love to get you the support that you need. With that said, there is quite a lot of violence and suffering in the Bible. So maybe an old school lecturer kind of guy might be good to respond to this. So Ian, do you maybe want to reply to this one for us?
Easy questions, hey Des.
Yeah.
Well, I can't hardly think of a more serious or disturbing issue, really, that has arisen in the midst of all of this this disease. Somebody's described it as an epidemic that lies underneath the pandemic, and the epidemic is the huge increase of domestic abuse that's going on in our country. And there's been lots of statistics coming out about the increase of calls to helplines and the police and various bodies. So, I mean, this is just something that is absolutely terrible. As if the pandemic were not bad enough, that, this becomes a context in which people's anger and frustrations boil over so that people within families hurt each other. It is just awful. And I hardly really know what to say at all. I mean, because the suffering and the fear is, if you're living with that, I mean, it is just so beyond what many of us are experiencing ourselves. But maybe just a couple of things come to mind. I mean, from my time as a pastor as well, of being drawn into situations of abuse in the home. A couple of things I want to say, I think, is for people not to feel as though it is their fault. Sometimes, I mean, abuse happens both ways. Sometimes men are abused, but most often it's women that are suffering. And I do know that people can immediately feel guilty, even as the abused person, and feel that somehow they've brought it on themselves, they've caused it, it's their own weakness, they're inadequate in some way, that they deserve it. And I want to just make a huge protest. And where is God in all of this? And what would God say? I mean, well, all I can think of is that, you know, the God that we believe in as Christians is a God of truth and light, and we need to speak some words of truth and light, I think, into this situation, and that would be one of them, is for people not to feel as though it is their fault if they are on the receiving end of abuse. I think the second thing is for people to know that they do not have to sort of take this as their Christian duty as well. I mean, I've sometimes encountered, you know, people in Christian homes where there is abuse that, you know, is awful, and sometimes women think that it, you know, that somehow God has called them to be loyal to their man and all of this sort of thing, and have to endure this to the nth degree. And I just don't think that's true either. I think that even within the covenant of marriage, if there is physical, mental, or sexual abuse, then the covenant is broken. And if it is really awful, I think you should leave. And I think that that's what God might say as well, although, you know, I can't speak confidently for God on all issues by any means. But I think that there is, you know, there is scope to say that is that people, you know, can get out and should get out of abusive relationships and not feel as though there is somehow some religious or Christian or scriptural injunction that means they have to stay and just take whatever is being dished out. What might God say in all of this? I'll just say one more thing and leave it open maybe for others to interject. Got something to say, and that is that I think there's a societal issue in play here as well that needs naming, and that is the exploitation, the objectifying, the belittling of women in our culture, in the press, on TV, sometimes the belittling of women in churches. I think all of this is in question at this time, and ought to cause us to think very deeply about some of these issues and to say that going forward from here, we will do better. We will be different. We will oppose things, you know, that leave women in a place where they're vulnerable and weak and are easily attacked. And, you know, we will speak out in God's name against those things. So I know that there are lots of places that can help women or people who are victims of abuse. There's national helplines, there's refuge, there's other things online. And I would say if you're in that situation, cry out, ask for help, pray. God does give strength, even in the most dreadful of circumstances. But reach out for help from those around you, and for all of us to have listening ears for people that we might know or hear of that are being abused, and we can possibly help. So I'm just going to say that, Des. I mean, it's such a massive, difficult subject, and I just feel totally inadequate saying anything at all. But
totally. And to be honest, mate, I'm glad that you had to jump on that hand grenade and not me. It is just such a massive issue, and there, like, you know, there's people that we know of that have suffered through some of this stuff, and yeah, please just reach out for help. Like, there are people out there who want to help. I think we'll maybe move on to something slightly different. Thanks for that, though, Ian. So the next question is, how do we see God using the pandemic? Lynn, some of your team are on the front line of this all around the place. Could you maybe share something about this for us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Des. I think it's really helpful to keep turning our eyes out to the rest of the world and thinking about this issue of what it means to be church, where there aren't the safety nets that we have here in the UK. There isn't a health service like we've got. There's not a government who has resources to provide the support that we've been seeing from our own government. And that is the case with many of the countries that Tier Fund's working with. So I think just that sense of God using the church in a fuller way, then probably we would have the opportunity for here to potentially be pivotal in stopping the spread of the virus. So I think that in itself is a way that God is using the church. And I mean, we through our church partners have been able to help over 1 million people just in the last few weeks,
wow.
Be that with health messaging, with, you know, water stations. It's as simple as people don't have running water, people don't have soap, people actually don't know how to wash their hands. being able to provide training and messaging and also dealing with the impact of the lockdown, the church being the solution, working through just local churches and local communities to be providing food parcels to the most vulnerable, people who can't get out and feed their families, cash grants where needed. So I just think that a myriad of ways that God is using the church. And I guess for us here in the UK, thinking about it globally, I don't know about you, but I've just been broken about the injustice of the world because of the coronavirus. I think it's really focused again our eyes on the ability of those who have and those who don't have to cope. And I've just been so challenged by that again, as somebody who is, my worst challenge is that I'm stuck in watching Netflix or whatever, compared to the reality of how some people are dealing with this, not just here, but around the world. So I think it gives us a fresh opportunity to be challenged, to be sacrificial, like Andy was talking about, to love sacrificially, to give, to pray in a whole new way in response.
Yeah, great. No, it's awesome. I just love it. Like, I just think, yeah, there's so much good stuff happening. And like, we just keep hearing stories of different things, and in the midst of this, what is going on. And Charlie, like, you must have some amazing stories from the City Mission, and yeah, do you maybe just want to share some with us?
Sure. Stories relating to how God might be using COVID. I can't be sure. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, good. My line's been sketchy, so I apologize if it goes a bit blocky. But certainly it seems as though this is God is making a recalibration. He's imposing a recalibration on the globe. I mean, now, of course, as with all things that affect all of society, it disproportionately affects the poor. And as been rightly said, the poorest people in the world will be, but perhaps there are ways in which they are disproportionately well equipped to manage such a thing. I could have viewed this, maybe the Tower of Babel has got some lessons for us in this, the kind of universality of language and commerce, and this attitude of mind of the people to say we are equal to gods. And this recalibration is about saying to people, well, actually, you know what, you're not, and your trinkets just don't mean much anymore. Certainly, I think God is using this pandemic from anecdotally, and we'll know in the future if this is the case or not, but he's awakening a hunger in so many people that I hear and speak to. Certainly a deep philosophical appraisal, if not a spiritual outpouring. He may be making contemplatives of people in numbers the world has never seen before, as we seek his face in whatever that means to the people who don't have the language for that. So many people now will be contemplating the big questions of life, and they will be coming up with answers, awakening a deep hunger that seeks a kind of nourishment, a thick stew instead of that thin soup that's unable to sustain any kind of body at all. So I really see how God is using this in remarkable ways. Bondedness of families, yes. We've just discussed the horror of the abusive, but there's also a tremendous amount of solidarity that we've all talked about already. So he's using it to show exactly who's in charge, if nothing more than that. We've been careering around like child emperors, and perhaps this is God's way of redressing matters on a global scale.
Yeah. Ian, Brodie, do you want to maybe say something there? You just sent me a wee message. Do you want to come back at Charles a little bit?
Yeah, I think we've got to be careful with the language that we use here, and we're all speaking live and thinking off the top of our heads. So I don't want to lay this on Charles too much, but I'm very nervous about you using the word that God is imposing something, because there's a huge difference between God using something and the language of imposing goes back to, well, God has caused this. And fundamental to who we believe God is, that God is loving, and therefore doesn't cause evil. He's not the author of evil. So God, yes, can use this, but he's not imposed it or caused it. So we've got to be careful with that. And I think one of the ways that God is using it, kind of like summarizing some of the things that Lynn and Lena were saying is, and even kind of like the question about domestic abuse and things like that, is God is shedding a light on things that are troubling in our world. And the challenge for us is how we practically respond to these, whether it's water inequality in poorer parts of the world, whether it's inequality to access to various things in our own street, of what are we going to do about that? What changes am I going to make to my life? Because it comes back to that, how do we love God and how do we love our neighbours both near and far? How do we live out the gospel? Are we good news people? Is one of the challenges that certainly is coming to me. And that's a double challenge, because how do we do that when we're locked in our houses? You know, and that's certainly something that's troubled me. And maybe being a good neighbour at times does mean that, as I think Lena already said, of being a good neighbour might mean staying in the house, keeping that physical but not social distance. But God shedding a light on things that should trouble us.
Yeah. Can I just flag up to everyone? It's 8 p.m. and I'm an alpha person and we finish on time. So it's 8 o'clock. We are, if you need to leave now, if you want to leave the live stream, if you want to go away, you can. But we've got four or so questions left to answer. And we're just going to stay online and round those up. And just as a kind of wee closing off to what we were just chatting about there, Eddie Watt, who's an amazing guy from Aberdeen, has just put a comment up saying, if anything is to come out of this difficult situation, I like to think that it will bring a lot more humility to our culture and our lives, regardless of social status. And that's a great thing. Eddie's got an amazing story. I'll tell you guys later, but yeah, check him out. In fact, Brodie, you're hit for this next question, I think, as well, which is why is there suffering? And at a time like this, a question like this is really tough. We get asked this a lot at Alpha, and you literally have a PhD in suffering, so you're definitely the man to maybe answer this. Do you want to take a lead on this for us, bud?
Yeah, so I did do my PhD in suffering and didn't come up with it I don't think there's not an answer to it, and I think that's the challenge of Kenneth Surin, who writes a book that everybody who looks at suffering refers to, called Theology and the Problem of Evil, says there's two ways of answering this. There's a theoretical way and there's a practical way. And I think God calls us to the practical response. We see throughout Scripture, whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament, of a pattern of people declaring that God reigns, and then in the next breath saying, where are you? Why is this happening? And then in the next breath saying, but we trust in you. And that's what we're called to do, is in these situations to throw ourselves upon God. And yes, ask God, why is this happening? Ask God to move and work in this situation. But we can waste so much energy kind of like getting bogged down in a philosophical debate that we can never get to the bottom of, when what God is calling us to do is to respond. I liken it to a story that lots of people will be familiar with, of the Good Samaritan. Of the Good Samaritan didn't, when he found the person who'd been beaten up, said, you know, was he a good guy or did he deserve what was coming? There was no debate. He just responded to it. And that's what God calls us to do. The challenge is, are we as Christians, are we as the church sensitive to that suffering, that we respond in an appropriate way? And that's the challenge of reflecting of what's the power structures and how we do it. Are we actually propping up systems of injustice? I'm reminded of the Brian Stevenson quote that the opposite of poverty is not wealth, but the opposite of poverty is justice. So how do we love God, walk humbly with them, seek justice, be merciful? that's the call on us, and that's the answer. The answer to the why suffering question is, do you know what? We can't answer it this side of eternity. We'll ask God when we see him face to face, but just now, how do we respond as God's people?
Amazing. Thanks, Brodie. That is yeah, a humbling response. It's great. That actually takes us to a kind of end of that theme, and we'll move on to our final theme. We've already run out of time, so we're running over anyway. But how we maintain our relationship with him in this time. So how do we maintain our relationship with God in this time is our kind of closing section. And the first question is, how can we stay close to God when we're all distanced? Lynn, as a person of prayer, maybe you'd like to kick us off with this one?
I get so nervous about that label. We're all people of prayer. Yeah, I mean, I like this question, I have to say, because I guess we're distant from each other, but we're not distant from the Lord. And I feel like what God is saying to me in this, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, is that he's issuing an invitation to draw close in a whole new way. And I think there's something about when our distractions are stripped away, especially in the West, when we've got so much to distract us, including all the busyness of church. There's something about now, especially when we don't, in my situation, don't have children, I'm not busy trying to do all of that. There's something about the kind of reality check on our relationship with God, where it's just us and him. It's raw me and God without the church, which can sometimes distract me, all the activity. And I kind of see that if I can't use busyness as an excuse anymore, I can kind of get a bit of a sense of where I'm actually at with God. And I think that that's a thing that God wants to use, so that we'll just bring that raw us in him, that ache, sometimes with the kind of poverty of spirit that comes from going, oh my goodness, I'm maybe not as close to God as I thought when I was a bit merrily going on about my way. And just to allow that kind of ache and that kind of nakedness to drive us deeper into him, and to hear him knocking at the door and to respond to the invitation. So I guess that the main thing I would say is, let's not fill all the gaps that we've got in our lives from some of these things being stripped away with other stuff. And there is a multitude of good resources, and everything getting chucked online and ways of connecting, and they're all good and they have their place. But you could easily just replace all the busyness with a whole new online busyness. And will we actually respond to that invitation to in some way up our time with God in this season? Because I think that's one of the main things that he wants to do, and one of the main ways we'll see fruit coming off the back of it. And just being really careful about the online time, whether that's good church stuff or Netflix or Facebook or whatever. And I guess in my own life, 3 things that I just want to make sure are part of every day are that there's a part of it that is about worship and adoration, and just being in the presence of God and being still in the midst of all the, not talking about all that's going on, but just being with him and enjoying his presence, that's bringing kind of a real stillness to my soul. Having some time in Bible study and meditation, praying scripture, and having some time in intercession. I just want to make sure that those 3 things are a part of every day. And yes, and having some kind of accountability. Let's use some of our online connection to just make sure there's somebody in our life that's saying, how's your prayer life going? How are you doing with God? Are you pressing in still? So that would be my response to that question.
Yeah, I think it's a great response. Someone, Stuart Finlayson's just messaged in saying, I'm finding prayer so hard at the moment, which I'm finding so painful. But in that, I'm finding praising him very simple, just listening. Praise God. And actually, I can totally relate to Stuart there. I really kind of operate my day around 2 times a silent prayer, which when you speak as much as I do is really, really difficult. But I go out for a drive in the morning and just have half an hour, and I do the same at the end of the day. But not being able to do that is really like forcing me to think in different ways, and with kids running about and that. So I think we're all just trying to find that place where we can pause at the foot of the cross, aren't we, and just actually be in his presence. So yeah, it's really helpful, and thank you. We're moving on to our penultimate question, and surely, where is God now is an apologist's dream of a question. So let's roll that one up to Andy Bannister. Andy, how do you respond to that, my friend?
That's a wonderful question, Des. And I think what I like is it connects to that question just Lynn addressed, because in one sense, you know, we can talk about a lot of this in the theoretical. We can have very theoretical conversations about how churches should or shouldn't respond. We can talk quite theoretically about where is God in suffering. But I think, as also Brodie reminded us, ultimately it comes down to the question of, you know, how we live as human beings here and now, and are we going to respond to God's invitation into a relationship that he makes for us in Christ. So actually, funnily enough, I don't consider myself an apologist at heart. I'm an evangelist. I get excited, I think like most of us do on this call, when people begin that response to what God has done for them in Jesus. So I love it when people ask this kind of question with an openness, because you know, we live in a very skeptical age, and in one sense, there's nothing wrong with being a skeptic. If you're a seeking skeptic, if you're a skeptic who's interested in finding out what the truth is, Jesus had a lot of time, I think, for that kind of person. And Jesus said, you know, those who seek will find. So when somebody asks, sort of, where is God in this? You know, so much of my approach to things is I love comparing and contrasting. And of course, you know, we can do that with the major belief systems. If there is no God, if atheism is true, the answer is that there is no God to be found. We're all doomed, and we are just matter in motion. And ultimately, that matter is going to stop moving at some point, and suffering has no answer. We're just crying into the wind. If Eastern religions are true, you know, something like Buddhism or Hinduism with its doctrine of karma, for example, is true, then the reason we're suffering is because you've done something in a previous incarnation. It's your fault, and the universe is getting its own back on you. If Islam, and my PhD was in Islamic studies, is true, we have a distant God who's up there kind of looking down at us, presumably saying to himself, well, I'm glad I'm not down there. It's a right old mess. And in Islam, we have a very, very distant, absent God. But that's not the God of Christianity. The God of the Bible is a God who steps into suffering, and both in the Old Testament and the New Testament is found right down there with his people, getting his hands dirty with the dust of the world, getting his feet dusty with the dust of the world, his hands bloody with the nails of the world. And I think where suffering can be really interesting, I think suffering can wake us up to a couple of things. It can wake us up to our mortality, and it can also wake us up to the where is God in all of this question. And I'd just like to end my answer to this with, you know, quoting one of my evangelistic heroes, C.S. Lewis, known to many people who aren't Christians, even through his Narnia books. Lewis wrote several books on pain and suffering, and he once wrote these words. C.S. Lewis said, "We can ignore pleasure, but pain insists on being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is a megaphone to raise a deaf world." And to people, I think, who are genuinely asking, where is God in this? I always want to say, probably closer than you think. He's certainly not absent. But the message of the scriptures, the message of the Bible, what I see demonstrated in the life of Jesus is he's right there with us in the suffering. When I, myself, my family have gone through pain and suffering, difficult times, it's often then where we found that actually Jesus is right there with us, sometimes closer than we think. So my answer to where is God in suffering? He's right here with us. And our question is, how are we going to respond? Are we going to turn our backs, head back into the busyness as soon as we can and things open up and go, gosh, I'm glad that's over? Or are we going to see and ask ourselves the question, what's the lesson that perhaps we can learn about the deeper things of life, and what God would have for us, even through the difficult times right now?
Boom. I couldn't have said that any better if I'd tried, mate. So good job, well done. No, I think that's exactly it, isn't it? It's like, what is next, and do we continue with these new practices and adopt some kind of new model, or where is this? But the reality is, God's right here beside us right now, in the midst of this. He's omnipresent. He's with us always, and we just need to ask for him to be there, and we can really delve into some of this stuff. This is our final question for our panel, and for me that's good, because I could be done with a rest. I'm having to look at a lot of screens here. It's very, very concentrating. And the last question is, God is just a theory made up by human beings. How do you answer that? Brodie, would you maybe like to throw some light onto that one, my friend?
Yeah, just want to as well kind of like pick up on Andy's point of, God is with us in suffering. And that's the whole message of the cross, isn't it? But that connects with something that Lena said as well of, sometimes we do experience a sense of absence. That Holy Saturday that we've just celebrated as part of our Easter celebrations. So even if you feel that God is absent, press into him. It's okay to kind of like come to God and kind of like scream, where are you? God is not offended by that. He is big enough to take it. He loves our interaction with him. So God is with us, but sometimes can feel absent. Press into that. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. God still loves you. So I think that's an important thing to say. And that God is not a theory. Well, again, I come back to Jesus, you know, so it was Feuerbach, kind of like, who lived just before Marx, who kind of like said that God is the projection of everything that we as people want to be, powerful, everlasting, all these kind of things. But the problem with that kind of thing is that it doesn't deal with who Jesus is. We know that approximately 2,000 years ago, there was a Jewish rabbi who turned what is modern day Israel upside down. And we have testimony to that, not just in our Bibles, but from contemporaneous accounts as well, that if it was an evidence, a court of law would be considered hostile witnesses. So C.S. Lewis has already been mentioned. Let's mention him again. So Lewis says, you know, we have this trilemma. We've got to decide, was Jesus who he said he was? Was he mad and managed to delude his followers? So his followers were so deluded that they laid their lives down for him? Or was he bad? You know, did he willfully deceive? And the only conclusion I can come up to is that Jesus is who he said he was. That he was fully human, fully God, and shows us what God is like. So, and that challenges that, for me, that challenges that, you know, God's just something that's made up. I've got to deal with the person of Jesus and what he's done and how he's changed history.
Yeah, sorry, mate. I got totally captivated. I love C.S. Lewis. It's a total alpha moment there. You know, it's that, you know, was he good? Was he bad? You know, where do you side? But you need to make a decision.
It's a bit of a classic response, because it's just a really good response of you know, Jesus shows us who God is, and you kind of like deal with Jesus. Another thing, I've been listening to a song by somebody I like called I've Seen So Much, or I've Seen Too Much. And it's that whole kind of thing of, do you know what, many of us have seen God do stuff as well, and how do we account for that? And it comes back always to the person of Jesus. It's the Sunday school answer. No matter what the question is, the answer is always Jesus.
Yeah, that's how I got through Bible college. Ian, speaking of Bible college, did you maybe want to just share some light on that? Like, how would you respond to that? How would you maybe help some new up and coming minister respond to that?
Oh my goodness me. Read the textbook. Well, yeah, on one level, it's a really difficult question. I mean, you know, and there is a side, you know, to God that's serious. I mean, you know, those of us who have been reading and thinking about theology for a long time sometimes feel like we know nothing at all. You know, what God is or who God is mysterious, and yet on the other side of it, how do I respond? I think there's only one response, and that is to say that, you know, when God has impacted your life, even though you don't understand all about who he is or what he's about or what he does or what he says, you just know that there is a reality that you are connected to, that some theologians have talked about as the ground of our being, or, you know, something that just makes it feel like your life is connected to ultimate reality in the universe. That ultimate reality, of course, expressed in a person, not just a philosophical concept. But I think it's that sense of personal encounter with God that transforms everything. I've listened to people, you know, almost despairingly speak sometimes about, I so wish I could believe in God and I just can't, you know. And on the other side of it, the only reason I can say that I believe God is because he is a reality in my own life. And I share that in common with those who walk this path as well, and they help me to understand who that God is. So no easy answer in one sense, and yet when we open our lives to God's presence, he speaks to us, he walks with us, he strengthens us, he gives us peace and assurance and mercy and confidence.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my answer.
No, that's good, man. Charlie, come on, you're bound to have a belter for this. You're always the man of a great one-liner. Come on.
I think so the question, God is just a theory made up by human beings. There's a lot going for that. I mean, if you want to run down that road, you can do that. You can say that any creature that doesn't eat its full carcass of flesh, but actually thinks to store some in salt and save some for the next day, is storing up something for a future. What's the future? Well, the future means tomorrow. Or what does tomorrow mean? Oh gosh, I'm a finite creature. Oh no, that means I'm going to die. How do I deal with death? Look, I think we'll have a deity, because it will preserve me and stop me going absolutely bananas. And perhaps if you're an evolutionary person, you may decide that that's a necessary component of a human psyche or a brain. I don't know. But I can only echo really what Ian's just said, and for me personally, which is, if you're an inquiring person and you've taken time to put a question on Pigeonhole, and you've taken the time to listen to this or listen to anybody on this panel at any point in time, you're a seeker, you're inquiring, you're asking big questions. And if you've ever come to any kind of crisis in your life and you've cried out, your spirit has cried out, almost like a capsule just gone, and it hits the heavens, and the Lord hears that perfect prayer from your soul to his heart, and he acts in people's lives. He does. And that's why the people that are moved by faith feel as though they know they've been changed. It's true, because why? They are different today than they were the day before. They're different people today than they were before they had their encounter with him. And to those who have not yet been there, that will sound nonsense. Revert to your Darwinian or other theory. But if you're having an encounter, if God is touching your life, drawing you near to him, you want to ask those big questions. You keep asking those big questions, whoever asks that, and I'm sure that you're going to lead right to the door of the King. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, love that. Can I also just say, from my point of view, if you do have questions, we would love to help you guys to find answers to that, whether it's on Alpha, whether it's on Christianity Explored. We live to engage in these conversations, and I think that's one of the things that I've really loved about tonight. All the guys on the panel have just really given their time and shared and just put what's on their heart out there for the public to deal with, and we'll have to see what comes out of that. But let me just kind of close up tonight by just saying thank you firstly to everybody that we've got, and we don't have a load of people to give you a round of applause, guys, so I'm going to give you a rather lowly one-handed one there. But I would really love to finish just by praying for us, and just let me leave you with this. You might have about 570,000 hours left to live. Why not spend 24 of them on an Alpha course thinking about the biggest questions? Because that's what we do, and my life has been changed by it, and I know that the guys on the call have been as well, not just Alpha, but been changed by the love of God, regardless of circumstance, regardless of what's going on. He is here for you right now, and if you want to reach out to him, say a prayer and he'll be there. Let me just pray quickly just to close. Lord, I thank you so much for all the people that have been on the panel tonight. I thank you so much for all the people that sent in questions and have just been around. But Lord, I just thank you for you. And no matter what goes on in our mountaintop moments and our darkest valley moments, we know that you're there with us, helping us to be the best version of us that we can be. In your name, Lord. Amen. Amen. Guys, thank you so much. We'll see you all later on. Thank you. Bye-bye.